Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Solutions for the Soul podcast. I'm Parker Tompkins. I am a therapist and clinical director at Soul Solutions.
My name is Tanesha Rivers. I am also a therapist at Soul Solutions.
Yes, happy to have you back, Tanesha. Happy to be
Thank you.
back for another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about trauma, specifically in the ways that it shows up and impacts us in our relationships, whether romantic relationships, familial friendships. But we've kind of sat and identified 5 ways or so that trauma shows up in a way that maybe isn't as quick to catch, or ways that we even justify to ourselves and maybe don't recognize as a trauma response, but they're here and they're showing up.
Absolutely.
Yes. Before that, too, I did want to just briefly acknowledge March as Women's History Month as well. And for forever, women have been disproportionately impacted by a lot of things, especially mental health experiences, including mental health experiences. I know off the bat there's almost a 2 times increased likelihood for women to experience anxiety and depression, and a lot of that is related to the societal expectation of women to be in these caregiver roles and for free.
Right.
Right. It's like unpaid caregiver roles. It's a very real thing because we have been a part of a society that's taken us so far away from acknowledging that homekeeping and parenting and, cooking, cleaning, managing the kids is not regarded as a job.
Right.
And it is. And it causes a lot of stress and high anxiety levels and challenges setting boundaries. So women do get the short end of the stick sometimes when it comes to those mental health symptoms that they have to mask a little bit more or just accept as part of their everyday.
Yeah. Not to mention having to do all these duties on top of having a job and paying bills.
Hmm.
Don't even think about single moms.
Yeah. It's like, what do they call it? Like second shift, right? When you get off work, but you still got to come home and are expected to do everything. Everything, keep the house. Yeah. So it is. And I think that kind of transitions us into relationships in the way that there aren't always the same expectations and there aren't always the things aren't justified the same way as they might be for men versus women. When we think about relationships and when we talk about it for the purpose of today's episode, not specific to women, men and women both experience some of these kind of trauma symptoms or ways that trauma is quietly sneaking in and impacting your relationship. So let's get right into it. That's cool with you. The first way, and I think this is a way that a lot of our listeners will feel very familiar with, is people pleasing, right? And people pleasing shows up for a variety of reasons. And I think an important thing to highlight too, not only does it show up in our relationships and impact those dynamics, but we, the individual, also does a lot of justification around people pleasing in a way that is a good thing almost. Like, yeah, I'm easygoing, I'm go with the flow.
Just being kind.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not hard to get along with, that whole thing. But in a lot of ways that can be a trauma response that comes from this belief that making other people happy is going to keep me safe and keep me stable.
Yeah. Just to know that a lot of these things come from some negative core beliefs. So the belief behind this one might be I'm too much, or I'm not good enough, or I've caused some issues in the past and people have made me feel like a burden. So I don't want to be a burden on anyone else. Let me say yes. Let me give my time. If I have money, I'll give my last dime instead of thinking about what you need first. Also, a state of being emotionally dismissed.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably going to come up a few times, but from my experience working with people who have been emotionally dismissed as kids, they feel like a burden and they're just like, nope, I don't want anybody else to feel like that. So let me just do everything for everybody and show everybody that I'm just a great person. I'm this nice person. But those are trauma responses.
Yeah. And it gets dangerous because, and you use the phrase like we say yes because that's that people pleasing tendency, but it gets really dangerous because you get into situations where people are saying a whole lot of yes and they mean no, or they don't want to say yes, but it's this like fear of being perceived as difficult or fear of, disrupting some type of peace, and it can really allow people to be walked all over in a
Yeah.
way that's no longer people pleasing. Now it's giving doormat. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also showed up with sexual trauma too. It becomes like the safety mechanism, being afraid to say no and
Yeah.
ruffle feathers and cause conflict. Um, some people will say yes when they absolutely don't mean yes at all, but they feel like that's the safest thing to do, and it shows up. It
Yeah.
shows up in other areas.
Yeah. And I think that is the root of it, right? A fear of conflict, a fear of ruffling feathers, like you said, because you don't want to be perceived as a challenge, because maybe throughout your life you were perceived as a challenge and people made it a point to let you know you're inconveniencing me, you're a burden, like you said, and it's not a good feeling. But we often put ourselves lower and lower on the list of priorities just to kind of placate other people, and
Yeah.
that can be tough. That can be tough. So people pleasing, it's not just I'm easygoing. It might be a little bit of avoidance there of things that are really important, especially when it comes to like a healthy relationship dynamic. For sure. And it expands to work. It expands to family. Like always wanting to make sure that nobody's criticizing me.
Yeah.
And it can be unrealistic too and dangerous.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. The second way that I think a lot of people it's kind of related, and a lot of people, this one really shows up everywhere, is that sense of perfectionism and almost like overachieving to a sense. And from a relationships standpoint, I think that it can show up as not only a fear of conflict, like we just mentioned, but a fear of making mistakes, a fear of making somebody upset, or just not being enough. Even a difficulty like relaxing, or feeling like we constantly need reassurance so that somebody can affirm, I am perfect, I am doing everything right, I'm not messing up. We need to hear that all the time. And that comes from a place of trauma as well.
Yeah. Also, jumping back, it could be that fear of what happens if you do something wrong.
Yep.
There's been children who might have been, there's that fine line between discipline and abuse, right?
Yeah.
But whose parents might have completely overdone it, and that put that fear in place. Well, I have to do this thing. I have to do this right so I don't get in trouble. And it carries on into adulthood.
Yeah.
And then also, it was something about work.
Oh, just perfectionism at work for sure.
Yeah, being an overachiever, that's what it was. Sometimes even in school or at work, for teens and adults, when you're overachieving, it seems really great on the outside, but that could also point to some issues a little bit deeper below the surface
100%.
that people don't really pay attention to. So that overachieving could, for one, be that fear of consequences afterwards. It could also be oh my gosh, I just drew a blank.
No, that's okay. You're right. I feel like fear of consequences, a fear of like, yeah, getting in trouble, having a repercussion. I might get fired. I might get broken up with. I might get whatever. And it causes anxiety because we're always in this mode of having to perform and achieve. And it's not sustainable in the long run. I appreciate too, you brought up parents, and we're talking about relationships. For most people, the relationship they have with a parent or caregiver, whatever that looks like, is their first example of a relationship.
Absolutely.
And we know as kids, we don't know too much, but we know like I'm supposed to be able to rely on this person or love this person. So when you have these traumatic or just troubling dynamics from childhood, it does teach you this is what things are supposed to look like, or this is what relationships might mean. So when you do have that overcritical parent, or the parent who's constantly needing more or needing you to be 10 out of 10 perfect, that translates, like that dynamic, that becomes a core belief. And I think when you talk about kids don't know, kids don't have the adult frustrations that we have. Like they don't go through life yet with the pressure of bills and responsibilities and maintain a relationship and make sure XYZ. Kids don't know any of that. So when our parents, kind of project some of those frustrations onto kids, they just internalize that. Kids being so egocentric, they don't have the knowledge and the experience literally yet to say, okay, mom's frustrated because work is crazy and she's juggling a lot of things. No, they just know mom is criticizing me and I'm in trouble and I'm being punished, and it creates that core belief that will follow us throughout life.
Yeah,
For
the
sure.
thought came back.
Let's
It
see
could
it.
also be avoiding. So, overachieving kids might be avoiding that conflict or abuse from
Mm,
home because it's like if I do sports, if I do after school things, if
yeah,
I
for
do all
sure.
these things, I don't have to go home and deal with that mess.
Yeah,
Or,
absolutely.
after a while, if I make straight A's, I get scholarship, I go off to school, I never have to come back here again.
Hmm.
Same with workaholics.
Yeah.
There have been parents who will completely just take on a lot of shifts, not necessarily because of financial issues. And I'm not saying that that's not a factor because it absolutely can be.
Hmm.
But if there are issues at home that they just don't want to deal with or don't know how to deal with or manage,
Yeah.
overworking yourself can show up. And it looks like just being an overachiever or, like you're just doing great things.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have to look beneath the surface and see
Hmm.
what else it could be.
Yeah, because again, that's another example of us justifying it. Like we almost, I don't know if in denial feels a little bit harsh, but we're not in a space to acknowledge like this is a trauma response. We just kind
Hmm.
of take it on as a personality trait.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do the best at what I do, which not saying there's anything wrong with that inherently, but it can become dangerous. It's a thin line. I
Hmm.
think even with perfectionism, even when I think about friendships, like being the friend that is making the itinerary or has to plan everything because there's just this need for structure that comes from constantly having to fit in a certain thing or constantly being criticized. I think
Yeah.
it all comes from somewhere, for sure. So if you are someone who feels like a perfectionist and feels like it's a positive thing, which again, don't get me wrong, I think there is strength in it, but
Hmm.
if it is at the detriment of your mental health or you're just doing it only for the benefit of, validation, reassurance, then something to look at there for sure.
Absolutely.
Um, Number three, shall we move on to number three? I think this one is important because this is maybe the main one from my perspective that people will take on and be like, there's nothing wrong with this. I'm just funny, or I'm just, I'm the comedian friend. But the third way that trauma is showing up in your relationships is this like hiding behind dark humor, right? I think that we do it a lot. People will make jokes about heavy things, or when heavy things are brought up, just deflect with a
Hmm.
lot of humor. And in relationships, that can be extra off putting because it might make your partner feel like there's not space for real emotional vulnerability. I think that's one way, but it's really just a protection of self, like this defense mechanism that our brain has used so that we don't have to feel and carry the weight of some of the heavy things that have happened to us.
Yeah. I was looking at some attachment styles with children with narcissistic parenting
Mm.
or parents with narcissistic traits. And that child is usually called like the mascot.
Mm-hmm.
This is to help keep things light in the house when they get kind of stern or if they
Yeah,
at times get a little bit tough, then this is the kid who kind of typically just makes everybody laugh and
yeah,
they're full of this energy and stuff. But in doing that, they're not necessarily addressing any of their own emotions either or talking
absolutely.
about what's going on with them because it's too heavy and I don't want to feel this.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have kids or adults who create these very hypersexualized jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be about a sexual part or an act or a movie. Like everything, it's just sometimes you have to take a step back and look at, okay, now I see if, maybe one or two here and there,
Yeah.
but like all of your jokes,
Yeah, there's
like,
something there.
yeah, every joke is dark, every joke is hypersexualized. Like, do you
Yeah.
need to talk? Probably
Yeah.
don't approach it like that, but
No, but that's so real. And I think
yeah.
it's almost a way of people do these things as almost a way of controlling the narrative, right? Because
Hmm.
if I can spin this into a joke or into something light, then there's no space for my vulnerability to show or for somebody to become aware that this is actually something that impacted me. So it's like this, it's a control tactic in a way that's just hidden behind smiles and giggles,
Hmm.
which again, I think that in some ways, some people may need that to kind of, for their own selves, to keep things a little bit light.
Yeah.
If you have to, you know, brush something off because maybe time and place is not the moment to get into something deep and grave, if you are triggered. But I think when it comes to really working through some things and processing, you got to look in the mirror and say, okay, maybe I'm not maybe I don't just want to be the class clown. Maybe I'm hiding something else. And I think there's some real stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And a fear of like letting people see
Yeah.
that genuine hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Sure.
Or like for the identity issues, I feel like shame attacks your identity. And if you don't want people to see the real you because you feel like either you're insignificant, you're not good enough, you have been shamed from your parents all your life, or emotionally abused by a partner, you don't feel confident about yourself.
Yeah.
So the way that you show up is by projecting all these jokes and making people laugh. And, it seems cool until you are at home by yourself and you have to sit with some of those thoughts. So it just becomes this, not a referee.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That's okay. I know what you mean. Just kind of like the internal too, like the judge, like the clock, who's making these decisions and putting up the walls. I think it's not always personality. It can be protection or deflection, really.
Yeah.
And I think those are the types of kind of micro level things that might invite someone to say, okay, maybe there is space for me to speak to a therapist about this, or speak to anybody, seek some type of professional help. Because again, when we just take all these things as personality traits and, well, this is just who I am now, sure, but there's a reason for that, and that's not how it has to be.
Right.
Especially if it's not comfortable and if it's not serving you in your relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, you end up showing up as the representative. I cannot recall words today.
That's okay. I know what you mean.
Representative. Yeah. You're showing up as your representative because you don't feel like it's safe to show up as who you are.
Yeah, that's very real. That is. I think too, people do that just thinking of protection of self, right? Like not showing the vulnerability, but we don't always consider how that is impacting the other person, like the person that we are in a relationship with or a friendship with or whatever. Like it kind of makes us feel, or it makes us come across as emotionally unavailable or even emotionally immature. Like I can't have no serious conversation with you about anything ever. And that doesn't create a very safe space as a partner or as a family member, as a friend either. Just tough. Yeah. So that dark humor, while it may be serving you in a way that keeps things light in an appropriate time and place, it might also be a pretty big defense or a pretty big sign of trauma coming up too. Yeah. All right, moving into the fourth, I think this is another big one that shows up, and I think this one is a pretty straightforward trauma response in terms of when you have individuals who have grown up not being able to rely on people, right? Or not being able to turn to that trusted caregiver that we're supposed to have, or that support system. I think hyper independence becomes this huge protection that shows up in relationships. So that's moving on to thing number 4, hyper independence. This notion that, I don't need any help. I can handle it all by myself. I'm not gonna let my guard down and allow someone to have power over me or my emotions. That comes from this core belief that no one's going to help me, or if somebody does show up for me, there is then potential for them to disappoint me, and that is scary for a lot of people.
Yeah, it causes you to have rigid boundaries. So if your boundaries are rigid, this means that you don't really let people in. You never give anybody any private information. You don't really have too many people in your close circle. It's like it just doesn't feel safe, and it comes from that fear of being hurt or being disappointed. You don't want those things to happen, so you create this big wall, and you're just like, nope. I'm good over here. I got it. I don't need any help. And I think also hyper independence creates this sense of pride that you have to do all these things. Like, let's just say for women, because we have to be mom, but with that title comes like the counselor, the doctor, the taxi driver. Like we have all these titles and we want to do all these things, and we feel incompetent or insignificant if we can't do those things. It just shows up as a sign of weakness for some people if you can't do all of these things at one time, when in actuality it's too much. But you don't see it that way because someone has made you disappointed or made you feel like you weren't doing enough. So you just said, you know what, I got it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it all myself. It's cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that weakness word that you brought up definitely stands out to me because that's what it is. I feel like people are so scared of being perceived as weak because maybe in the past when there were moments of trauma, whether that trauma was abuse or just, tricky relationship dynamics, I think, and we've said in previous episodes, we get into trauma and think big T trauma all the time, but
Yeah.
you might even, I'm like, what's another word we could use that's not trauma? Because the way that your daddy talked to you, even if he wasn't screaming, cussing you out, can still have an impact on how you function and what you think is appropriate. So I think when it comes to hyper independence, is you see people that weren't able to ask for help, and so now in relationships are not able to ask for help. And, I think the average person would say in a relationship, ideally your partner would take some of the load off, right? Like make your life easier in some ways.
Yeah.
But these hyper independent individuals don't allow that because of that fear.
Yeah, and how is anybody going to know how to help you if you don't speak up about it?
Mm-hmm.
And in the long run, it kind of looks like once you're burnt out, no one helps me, no one hears what I'm saying, and I'm not feeling understood or heard,
Yeah.
but you haven't even given yourself that chance. I think defense mechanisms might be another word. If people don't feel like they've been traumatized, it just becomes a defense mechanism of being hyper independent. So even with emotional abuse, or just saying emotionally dismissed, because some parents don't really intend to do
Yeah.
that, but they don't know how to manage their own
That's a good way to put it.
emotions. So like when you've been emotionally dismissed, you also gain a sense of hyper independence. So if you are the sensitive child, you are the one who kind of brings up a lot of issues, but it might be too much for the parent to handle, or they don't know how to handle it. It's just like, oh, you're just being dramatic, you're too sensitive. And then you learn not to come to people about your problems because it's clearly saying that my voice is not important.
Yeah.
So since my voice is not important, I got it. Don't worry about it. I'm not even going to ask you for help anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I've had a client who we've been recently talking about this, and for her, she was parentified way early, too early, having to watch over siblings. And so in her mind, she's like, if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it. So how she's carried that on to her adult life, when she goes to work, if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And then she's all stressed out.
Yeah, and overextending yourself. And,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, okay, where did that come from? We made the connection that came back from being parentified as a child. Because you feel like if it doesn't get done, if you don't do it, it's not going to get done. And then people might blame you for things going wrong.
Right.
And so you're just like, let me make sure I do all of this right so that no one can say that I'm wrong.
100%.
I'm just gonna do this, and I can tell everybody that I did this thing right, and I didn't have to ask for anybody.
Yeah. I think the flip side of that too, like we try to take everything on and handle it all ourselves so that there's no room for error, no room for disappointment. And then I also think when things get so hard and too overwhelming that we can't, these hyper independent individuals specifically, that's when we really start to almost isolate and push people away because it's like, okay, I am struggling to be independent, but I can't let anybody know that. Or I can't let anybody see that. So now I'm going to just cut you off so I can go struggle by myself, and still not allowing yourself to depend on someone or seek help. It's just more of almost like these rigid boundaries and this being quicker to detach so that you don't have to expose that maybe it would be beneficial to have somebody assist me in this or support me in this because that feels like a weakness.
Yeah, absolutely. It also just that lack of safety. That lack of safety. And when you go into that isolation mode, you're just kind of stuck with your thoughts of, again, like I said earlier, either no one's there for you or no one's going to be around you, or just bumping, I don't need anybody.
Yeah.
I've heard that, and that's just a defense mechanism. I think we'll touch on this later, but sometimes we just have to slow down and think about where this is coming from.
Yeah.
As I've said before, all behavior means something. We have to understand what that behavior means.
Yeah. That's such a big thing too, because we're not meant to go through life alone, right? And that doesn't mean you have to have a partner or a romantic relationship, but to some degree, there's some type of social support. We're not meant to face all of our challenges and struggles alone, but we resort to that. And then think about all of the mental health challenges that come from that, from loneliness and isolation, just beyond just depression and anxiety, but just learning different cognitions about self or feeling like now I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving. I mean, it's so nuanced when it comes to just this acceptance that I'm going to handle things alone. It's not how it was meant to be, for sure. That is tough. And I know we have one more. We'll kind of circle back and see like the ways that we can support people through this, because I think it's a lot of learned behaviors that just become the normal for people. And how do you break the hyper independent cycle when for 20 years that's been the cycle? It's hard. It's not comfortable.
I don't see it as a problem.
Right. Yeah.
It's literally thought that's just how I am.
It is what it is. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be.
Right.
For sure. So before we kind of go into that, I guess we'll go ahead and introduce the fifth way that your trauma might be creeping into your relationships. And this is something that I think women get a lot of slack for. Our nonchalant men are not always in this overanalyzing mode, but this fifth way that it shows up is overanalyzing mood, context, text messages, any slight shift, tone tends to be overanalyzed. And I think that is a trauma response as well. I think even when we think about PTSD and bigger trauma, hypervigilance comes to mind, where we're always almost on edge and we're on guard and we're wondering, is something bad going to happen? Is somebody going to get me? Can I trust? I think that shows up in this overanalyzing where, oh, you said something, it sounded a little funny. Do you hate me? Or you took 5 minutes to text back instead of 1 minute. Like, does that mean something? And I think that is something that really impacts people's relationships in a hurtful way.
Yeah, I've seen it show up as like that fear of abandonment, fear of people leaving them. And again, I always say most of the stuff comes from childhood,
I mean, it's
teenagers.
real. Yeah.
Kids who have been neglected as children, not kids, adults who have been neglected as children. Or people who have gone in and out of their lives. Again, if you have a narcissistic parent who always used that threat and knowing that you would be afraid and using that against you, like, oh, well, since you didn't do this, I'm going to go this way, and they end up stonewalling.
Yeah.
That becomes an issue with hypervigilance and that fear of abandonment. It's like, oh my gosh, they said it this way. Are they going to leave? Or do they hate me? Like, did I do something wrong? Let me fix it. And the whole time it's really nothing at all. And it's not as deep as the person has perceived it to be.
Right.
But it created this huge fear that this person is going to go away or they don't like me.
Yeah. It's our brain like constantly almost scanning for any type of danger or any type of something that's going to cause pain to me or discomfort. But it also leads to a lot of anxiety in relationship. I think this is the main example that we see some of these some of these anxious attachment styles where I can't relax unless I know that you're good and that everything feels right between us and feels, there's no ruffles. And I think that is not sustainable because now we're constantly checking our partner and puts our partner sometimes on like a defense mode of like, what am I doing wrong that you're constantly worried that something is wrong, and it's just a tough dynamic to be a part of. Yeah.
Slow down and just breathe.
But even with that one, like how can we support clients? How can we support individuals when you take the people pleaser or the overanalyzer? Like, how can we begin to like look at some of those things and break some of those patterns? What are some of the things that you bring into session?
I think a lot of it is starting to recognize what your negative core beliefs are and understanding where that came from, because there was an experience. Something happened that made you feel this way, and then the belief came up. So the belief might be, I'm insignificant. I've said that before, but it's come up for me, not for me, but for some clients before. No, actually for me in the past too, just to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't deserve love. Those things came from certain experiences. So I try to get to pinpoint where did that come from and what experience did that come from and what did that say about you. If it said to you that you are not good enough or you're ugly or whatever that is, you have carried that and it's just showing up in different ways. Even if you try to fake confident
Mm-hmm.
and use
Yes.
humor or put on a whole bunch of makeup. No shade to makeup wearers.
For
I
sure.
love makeup,
Mm.
but it becomes this facade that you have to hide behind because you don't feel safe being yourself. And I think this is why we call it trauma, because at some point in time it took that safety away
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't have any skills to cope with that. And that's why it shows up and manifests in your adulthood.
Absolutely.
So kind of breaking down the origin of where these came from. Um, Another thing I like to use is the blocks. I know people have used blocks and bags and stuff before, but just imagine that you're walking up this big mountain, right? It's a big steep mountain. You're carrying this huge bag full of rocks, huge heavy
Mm-hmm.
rocks, and it's making your journey up this mountain that much harder. Sometimes we have to recognize whose voice did that negative core belief actually come
Mm-hmm.
from. It's not really yours. Your mom might have gave you that voice. Your ex-boyfriend might have gave you that voice. Another
Yeah.
family member could have gave you that voice. Take that out and throw it down here where it belongs,
Mm-hmm.
and start giving yourself some more challenge positive things to say.
Mm-hmm.
Not faking the positive, but looking at the evidence. Where's the evidence saying that you're not good enough?
Right.
Where's the evidence saying that you're not smart enough? You've made it this far. It might have been challenging, but did you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Did you just need more help? That doesn't make you stupid.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you incompetent.
Yeah.
So working on that and challenging some of those beliefs and building that self-esteem is something I like to work on.
Yeah, for sure. I love that, and I agree. I think when you talked about the different where these voices can come from, that stood out for me, and I think it's so important because when we have traumatic experiences, our voice becomes so quiet because
Mm-hmm.
there's so many other, the criticism, the pressure, the expectation. So our own desires and our own wants and needs, that voice gets lower and lower. So
Yeah.
something I like to do in session 2, and a lot of this is around boundaries, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what so many of these 5 things that we even identified stem from a challenge setting boundaries. Like, we're going to be people pleasing because we don't want to set a boundary. We're going to be a perfectionist because we don't ever want to say no, this lack of boundaries. So I actually had a session this week, and a client the whole session, she was so overwhelmed with her work week and her life and balancing everything. And she's so tired. And she's like, but my friends want me to go. My friends want me to go, drive 2 hours for this little road trip tomorrow. I'm just exhausted. I don't want to go. And I said, stop right there. What did you just say? You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to go.
Yep.
Okay. It's okay.
And
It
that's
doesn't
all
make you a bad
right.
friend. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you don't care about the people in your life. You've had a lot going on. You've had a busy week, but making people feel comfortable and honestly familiar again with their own needs and wants, like
Yeah.
what it is that would make you feel good. What do you need? Do you need to rest, or do you need to hop in the car for 3 hours and have a fun night and then turn around the next morning and be more exhausted? Probably not.
Right.
But being able to like highlight and pick out those things when you're communicating and it's coming from you, pay attention to that. Not
Mm-hmm.
all these other expectations and pressure, because that's where we just get into these relationships and get honestly more performative and a little bit less genuine, I would say,
Yeah.
because we're not listening to our own self. We're just trying to make sure everything else is okay all the time, and it's not necessary.
It's definitely not. I had a situation like that myself.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, like I had a friend visiting from out of town. My niece's birthday was that weekend. I had a whole bunch of my own personal stuff that I had to do. And by the end of the day, when it was time to go and try to see everybody, I curled up in my bed. I put my
Mm-hmm.
blanket on and I was in tears like, I can't do this. Somebody
Yeah.
has to get a no, and it can't be my stuff.
Yes.
Somebody's going to have to be disappointed, and that's still okay. And she
Mm-hmm.
understood. Like, it was fine. But in my head, I come up with this
Of
whole
course.
thing that, oh my gosh, I'm a bad friend. I'm a
Yeah.
bad auntie. Like, I can't do all these things on my own. Like, I'm stressed out.
Yeah.
Instead of just listening to my body. So I
Mm-hmm.
can totally relate to that.
Yeah. And we all do it. And
Hmm.
I think it's almost natural in some ways to just, again, want to be easygoing, not want to be difficult, but I think it sends the wrong message to ourselves. And truly, the most, from my experience and the clients I work with, and just personally, the people that are the most mentally and emotionally regulated are ones that can say no
Yeah.
and can set boundaries and put themselves first, and have enough, I guess, security within themselves to know this isn't a reflection of like you said, me not showing up for somebody or me being a bad friend, family member, whatever. In fact, it's the opposite. It shows I know my limits. I know when I need to prioritize myself so that I have time to pour into my other relationships.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think it's taking a step back and processing like what your thoughts are behind the action. So if the thought is, well, they did this thing for me, I have to show up for them in this way, or again, like if I don't show up for this person, it means that I'm not a good friend. That in itself says enough for you to kind of, it should send off some red flags at some point. So taking a step back and processing, okay, am I really a bad friend if I don't show up? Or is this transactional? Where did this transactional love come from?
Yeah, it's true.
Did it come from childhood? Did it come from parents or friends? Like, I'm not a bad friend if I don't show up just because they showed up for me in that way. That's something that they wanted to do.
Right.
They didn't do it because they wanted something in return. And that's something that we have to take a step back and look at too. Sometimes you don't realize that things are transactional, but if you recognize and take a step back and just pause and see where that came from, if you're looking for love in exchange for something else, that's transactional. Slow down. It's slow down. And if someone is treating you in that way, it might be time to set some boundaries in place. Another thing that came up for me when you were talking about boundaries is paying attention to what your body is saying. If your body, if let's just say someone calls your phone and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't want to answer this, or you tense up, you're afraid, you're like, ooh, if I don't answer this phone call, it's going to be a mess. This person's going to say this. That is a trauma response. That's a trauma response. And sometimes not even just your thoughts, you really have to pay attention to what your body is saying and those sensations.
I agree.
I don't want to talk too much, but
no, it's true though. And I think another very, kind of surface level even intervention that I try to implement is like flipping the script a little bit. For the example I just used with the client didn't want to go out of town. I said, if your friend called you and said, hey, I've had a crazy week, do you immediately equate that to you're a bad friend?
Right.
Because we, again, back to just being the hardest critic on ourselves, people do put themselves first in a way that should encourage us to do the same for ourselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Other people don't have a problem setting boundaries sometimes or saying no. And it's not to say, it's not about selfishness or anything like that, but it's to show like people do what they need to do for themselves sometimes in a way that's healthy. I have another client that's coming to mind, and she made, this is another example, just with perfectionism and not wanting to be criticized. She actually works in mental health too. So she had a client that canceled on her. She's like, oh, am I a bad therapist? They canceled. I said, girl, you canceled on me 2 weeks ago because you had something to do. Am I a bad therapist? But it's like, no, we just take these images and we take these messages, and sometimes it's all about perspective. Like if you can see it from somewhere slightly different from where you're standing right now, the whole image can change and the whole picture can change.
Yeah.
Relationship wise.
I know this is a common saying, but putting your mask on before you put your passenger's mask on, even if it's a kid, like if you're on a flight, they say that because if you take the time to help the person sitting beside you or a kid put their mask on first before you put on yours, the altitude is going to knock you out.
Yep.
You're going to lose oxygen.
Yeah.
So you have to put your mask on first and take care of you first, and then step in and take care of someone else if they're struggling.
Yeah.
And if we're not paying attention to what we are experiencing, our thoughts, what our body is saying, what our experience has created for us as an identity, if we're not doing that, we're just kind of confirming what the emotional abusive parent has said or the abusive relationship has said. We're just confirming that those things are true.
Yeah.
Like if you feel like you're not good enough because your ex said that, and then you're choosing to not pay attention to, and this could be subconsciously not doing it on purpose, but you've confirmed to your body that, yeah, this is true. So let's just go ahead and not show up in this way because we don't want any problems. So it's really important to just kind of stop and pay attention to yourself for that reason. Because you have to create this form of trust between your mind and your body.
Very true.
Sometimes we don't trust our own decisions, and that can even be a trauma response in itself, not trusting your decision making or your emotions.
Right.
Speaking of emotions, building your emotional vocabulary. everything can't be happy, sad.
Mad.
Yeah, that's
You're
not.
not mad. You're embarrassed.
Yeah.
You're disappointed. You
Mhm.
feel, yes, slight. Any of the things. Yes, I think that's so important too. Emotional recognition. The recognition has to come before the regulation. Truly, you have to be able
Absolutely.
to recognize what you're feeling to be able to manage it, to manage it effectively. But I like what you said also about the way these things come to be, and almost like reaffirming these kind of negative patterns that we get into based on the past experiences. And I think I take that as, or I want others to take that as an invitation, like this is what we're here for and what
Mhm.
professionals are here for. Because these things that we've identified, these 5 things today, whether you're a people pleaser or hyper independent or perfectionist, whichever one, these aren't character flaws. They're
Right.
really survival strategies that
Mhm.
have been learned for a reason. But the things that maybe made you survive in the past are showing up and making your relationships harder
Yeah.
now. And I think that's something that people do need support to just kind of work through and to kind of see what that looks like for them individually and how to break some of those cycles.
Yeah. During this time, and this is for any type of mental health therapy or healing, while you're doing this, give yourself some patience and grace
Mm-hmm.
because it didn't take you overnight to get here, especially if you're learning some of these things that are actually maladaptive coping skills. If you're learning it now that these aren't actually working, it didn't take you overnight to get here. So it's not going to take you overnight to kind of unweave some of this stuff and work
Mm-hmm.
through it. So it's a process, but be patient with yourself and give yourself
Yes.
grace. And also for the people that you are working with in relationships, they might need some support too. And being able to communicate what you need and why you need that to that person
Mm-hmm.
is going to be important too. And they need time to learn that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody's not just going to come off gate and just know how to handle you.
Right.
And especially this new version of you, this healed version of you. And sometimes that
Yes.
might be a little different for them. So
Mm-hmm.
patience and grace on both parties, I think, is important.
Definitely. I think because we're not dating ourselves, I guess,
Exactly.
and I know we haven't been speaking specifically about
Yeah.
dating, but when it comes to dating, I think that's a lot of people's kind of like misconception where this is how I feel and handle things and handle conflicts. So that's what's expected on the other person. And we're all coming from our own baseline experiences and we're
Mhm.
not going to handle things the same. And it's something to work through as well.
Yeah.
So on an individual level, and at Soul Solutions, we do offer it all. We have individual counseling, couples counseling, family counseling, because we do recognize the importance of relationships just as one of the main functions in life and what drives us and fills our everyday. So if any of this resonated with you, or if you feel like your relationship might be negatively impacted or even more subconsciously impacted by some of these patterns, we're definitely here to help. You can find us on our website, www.soulsolutionsccs.com. We're also on Instagram, and we hope to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Of course, y'all have a great evening. See you later. Bye.